Welcome to the HDR Light Studio Quick Start Guide. This video will teach you how to create amazing HDR lighting in HDR Light Studio. Before we continue, make sure you have downloaded and installed the HDR Light Studio standalone application. Start HDR Light Studio. If you're running a demo, click on Start HDR Light Studio in demo mode. The HDR Light Studio interface should look something like this. But if it doesn't, you can reset it by going to Window, Layout, Load, Default, Standalone. We can drag by the top bar to rearrange the user interface to our liking. We can also drag and drop onto panels to tab them. Over here, we have the render view. It's our built-in CPU renderer. Let's press play and select the kettle demo scene. The purpose of this render view is not to produce final images. Instead, it's here to provide a real-time preview of the lighting on the model using a single simple shader. We can tweak the appearance of the 3D model in the render view settings panel, which is tabbed here. Let's increase the resolution of the render to 800 by 600 pixels. We can choose how many samples there are, so let's increase the max samples to 160 using this slider. It will calculate more samples and make the render smoother. We can also change the diffuse color of the shader. When we change the color, everything updates instantly. There's a single shader applied to the entire model. So whatever the most dominant material is on the scene, we can adapt this shader to look something like it. This will give us a better preview of what the lighting will look like in our final render. I'll make it red and tweak the reflectivity slightly. We can also tweak the index of refraction if we wanted to. If we look over here, we have a camera drop-down where we can choose which camera to look through. This demo scene only has one camera view, so I'm going to light this view. Let's look at the canvas panel. New projects will always contain this default gradient background that's lighting our scene. This is because the render view would be black if we didn't have any lights. So in the light list, if I turn off the default gradient background light, we can see the canvas is black and so is the render view. Let's turn this light back on. Okay, we can control the display exposure of the canvas by dragging this icon left and right. This does not change the exposure or the brightness of your lighting design. This only controls the exposure of this panel only, and it's useful if you have bright lights so you can reduce the display exposure and understand your lighting much better. We can do the same on the render view. And we can double click on the icon to reset it to its default state. With our light selected, take a look in the Light Properties panel. It contains all properties of this light. The Settings tab contains the main properties of your light, like the position and size. And the Appearance tab contains properties to do with what the light looks like. For now, let's go back to the Settings tab. We can change the brightness of this gradient background using the brightness slider. We can also use the plus and minus buttons. This is equivalent to 1/3 of a photographic f-stop. The large plus and minus buttons will double or half the brightness. This is equivalent to a full photographic f-stop. Now, there's actually a much better way to control the brightness of a light. Look at the drop-down at the bottom left of the render view. Here, we can choose what parameter we would like to drive. By default, it's set to move. Notice how each option has a shortcut. Let's select brightness. Now, with our cursor inside the render view, we can click and drag from side to side and the brightness of our light will change. Notice how at the bottom of the render view, we can see by how much we have made the light brighter or dimmer. And we can see the brightness property update in real time in the light properties panel on the right. We can also do the same on the canvas. But first, we need to select brightness from the drop-down here, as both the render view and the canvas have their own drop-downs. This is handy because we can choose to control one parameter on the canvas and another in the render view. We know the shortcut for brightness is Q, so with our cursor on the canvas, we can press Q on the keyboard and then change the brightness. Now let's make our first light. From the toolbar on the left, create a Scrim light. The light has been added to the center of the canvas. We can see it in the light list, and we can see it in the render view behind the kettle. Choose Move from the drop-down, and move the light on the 3D model by clicking and dragging on the render view. We call this light painting. Notice how the latitude and the longitude properties are updating in real time in the light properties panel. Over here, we have the LightPaint mode drop-down, where we can choose the method for positioning our light. We have it set to reflection by default, so lights are moved to reflect in the clicked or dragged location on the 3D model. We can also move the light on the canvas if we want to. But first, let's press the W key to switch to the Move parameter. Okay, now we will make the light a bit brighter. Let's make this light bigger. The shortcut for scale is R, so with my cursor inside the render view, we can press the R key and the parameter will change. Now we can drag from side to side to uniformly scale the light. Notice how the width and the height sliders are moving in the light properties panel. Let's go to the Appearance tab to look at how this light was made. This light uses content type Scrim light. If we click on the drop-down, we can see the different types of lighting content we can make. Each content type has its own method of light creation that determines what the light will look like. Most of them are procedural, so the possibilities are endless. For example, we have bulb, gradient, box gradient. Let's continue looking at the Scrim light content type. Okay, take a look at this picture. It perfectly shows the concept behind the Scrim light. So, what we have here is this sheet of material. We have the spotlight placed behind it, and it's shining its light through that material, and it's creating this really interesting lighting effect. This is exactly what the Scrim light was made for, to mimic that sort of effect used in photography. On the left, we have the top view, where this line is the top of the material, and behind it we have a polygon light, or a spotlight. On the right, we have the front view. Over here, we have a similar tool mode drop down to what we have seen in the render view, and on the canvas. By default, it's set to move, so we can click and drag in the top view to bring the light closer or further away from the material. Notice the height slider moving in real time as I'm doing that. The further away the light is from the sheet of material, the softer a light effect will be. In the front view, we can click and drag to change the position of the light behind the material. The white line represents the area that's used for the appearance of a light, as we can see in the light preview here. Most times, you won't need to use the sliders to manually adjust your light. Instead, we can use the drop-down or the keyboard shortcuts and interact with the top and front view. Let's say we want to tilt the light. We can press E on our keyboard with our cursor inside one of the views to change the tool mode to rotate. Then we can click and drag to rotate it. We can scale it and use the width slider to make it really narrow. There are a lot of things we can control using the drop-down, and for fine adjustments we can use the sliders. We have tutorial videos dedicated to Scrim lights, showcasing creative ways to use them in your projects. Check out learning resource number 1 in the description. Now that we have a hotspot on one side of the light, we might not want to move this light by its center. We can reposition the light handle in the light preview and move this light by its edge where the hotspot is. Okay, at the moment, this light has very sharp edges. Let's change that. We can go to the Alpha Multiply tab and check the Active checkbox. We have now applied an optional secondary alpha that is multiplied by the alpha of the main light content. The alpha input can come from an image, gradient, and many more content types. We are going to use the polygon content type. We can choose how many sides our light is going to have, change its softness, and the smoothness of the corners by changing the radius. Okay, let's go back to the Settings tab and learn about the Presets panel. This is your library of lighting content. It displays studio lights by default, but presets contain so much more. For example, in the filter drop-down, let's go to HDRI Haven Exteriors. Here we have a range of exterior HDRI maps we can use. As you can see, the list is long, so there's a lot to explore. For now, let's go back to studio lights. We can quickly make a light by dragging and dropping the thumbnails onto our model, and the light will be placed exactly where we want it. We can see the light has been added to the light list. It also appears on the canvas and is lighting our shot. We can click and drag to move it. Notice the overlay on the render view at the bottom. We can hold Shift whilst dragging to put a horizontal lock on the light, or hold Ctrl to move the light vertically. Let's move this light here. If we wanted to fine-tune the position of a light, the Move Relative mode is very useful for that. This will adjust the position of the light relative to the mouse movement. So, if we drag from anywhere inside the render view, the light will be moved from its current position. If we wanted even more precision, we can hold Alt as we drag. Okay, what if you wanted to import your own HDRI map and edit it? Let's do it. Create a picture background from the toolbar. If we go to the Appearance tab in the Light Properties panel and go to the Main tab, we can click on the folder icon in the Image property and load our image. I'm going to pick this EXR file. You can download this file from the Download section in the description. Because the image file is high resolution, we are prompted with this image conversion pop-up, asking if we want to convert our image into a mip-mapped file. A mip-mapped image is a single image file that contains multiple resolution versions of our image. If we had a 50K HDRI map and we'd load it in memory, it would take a huge amount of space and unnecessarily flood our memory. When we convert our high-res image into a mipmapped.tx file, our image will be loaded at a resolution that's needed for our HDR Light Studio session, allowing HDR Light Studio to remain fast and responsive. So, it's highly recommended to always convert your image files. we'll be asked where we want to save our mipmapped.txt file and under what name. I'll save it on my desktop with the same name as my EXR file. And there we have our HDRI map we have just loaded. In the light list, the picture background containing our HDRI map is at the top of the list. Let's reorder this light by clicking and dragging to move it further down the list. Now the two lights we created before are sitting on top of the HDRI map so we can see them. So far, all the lights created are on the HDRI map. Let's select this light and go to the Settings tab. Over here, we have the Area Light checkbox. We can use it to convert any light with 3D mapping, moving it from the HDRI map and building it inside the 3D scene. When lighting with HDR Light Studio plugins for your 3D software, HDR Light Studio will build and control HDR textured area lights inside your 3D software in real time while you light. They will be correctly set up for the chosen renderer and mapped with a live HDR texture from HDR Light Studio. At the moment, we are using HDR Light Studio standalone, so we are not connected to a 3D project inside 3D software via a plugin. However, we can still convert lights into area lights. It just means we will only be able to render out the HDR textures, and then we will have to build and set up the area lights in our 3D software manually. Okay, let's enable the checkbox. Not much appears to change, but we now have area light settings. The most important one is the Smart Dolly. We can drag the Smart Dolly slider to a smaller value and the area light will appear in the render view. We can adjust the scale for the Smart Dolly distance to suit different scene sizes. You can adjust this in the Preferences panel. There's a video explaining this setting in our learning area. Check out Learning Resource number 2. You will notice the area light can still be seen on the canvas, but it's not actually included in the HDRI map now lighting the shot. It's shown on the canvas for reference only. Area lights are perfect for lighting details on your model. Let me show you. Solo the area light by clicking on the S button in the light list. Turn off the area light checkbox. The light returns to the HDRI map. You can see it's lighting the whole model. Let's enable the area light setting again. You can see the area light is now lighting a smaller part of the model. Let's duplicate this light by right-clicking on a light in the light list and selecting Duplicate. Press Enter to use the same light name. They don't need to be unique. Area lights are also positioned and manipulated using the LightPaint system. Ensure you have Move selected in the drop-down, then click and drag on the model to move it. We can press the R key on our keyboard whilst inside the render view, then drag the mouse left and right to scale it. If we press E, then drag left and right, we can rotate the light. Okay, let's unsolo our lights. For this scene, we prefer to not have this area light on the left. So, I'm going to right-click on this light in the light list and delete it. Now let's move this area light a little bit further away from the model using the Smart Dolly so we can see some nice reflections on the spout. Okay, I'm happy with this lighting design. So let's complete the lighting process by producing high-resolution textures on disk. This will include our HDRI map and HDR textures for our area lights. Press the Production Render button in HDR Light Studio. A Production Render panel will open. In here, we can change the render settings like the orientation. The default orientation for the image-based lighting sphere or dome varies between different 3D software and renderers, so it's important to select your 3D software and renderer from the list. If your 3D software is not listed, you can choose Custom and manually set a rotation value and optional flip to match the default settings of your 3D software. If you'd like to find out more about the production render panel and how to find a match for your unlisted 3D software and renderer, do refer to our online documentation. Check out Learning Resource number 3. In this example, I will render a HDRI map to use in Cinema 4D with V-Ray. Next, we can set the resolution for our HDRI map. I'll go with 3000 by 1500 pixels. Here, we can change the resolution of our area light textures. I will keep it at its default. We will press Browse and choose where to save our files and under what name. I will save it in a folder on my desktop and call it kettle_demo. Press Save and render. Now if I go to my desktop and click on the HDR Light Studio demo folder, we can see our HDRI map and our area light texture. Okay, so that covers all the essentials. The next part of this video will briefly cover some advanced features that can further improve your efficiency and creativity. It is optional to watch and only recommended if you're comfortable with the essentials shown so far. If you're happy to skip the next part, then a good next step would be to watch the tutorial workflow on how to use HDR Light Studio connected to your 3D software. Okay, let's go back to HDR Light Studio and quickly look at some advanced features. Say we really like how this light is looking. We can save it as a light preset and have it added to our presets panel to use on future projects. So, with our light selected, go to Create, Light Preset. Now we can choose what tag to save this light under. I'm going to create a new tag called my_studio_lights. Press OK. Give it a description, for example, Scrim_light1. And press OK. Now if we go to our presets panel and under lights, we search for our tag, so in this case, my_studio_lights. You'll see the light we have just created and we can drag and drop it onto our model. We don't need this light anymore, so let's delete it. If we go to Edit, Manage User Presets, you can delete, manage and organize the presets you created using this panel. We have tutorial videos explaining the preset system in detail, including how to import and store your own HDRI maps. Check out Learning Resource number 5. Next, we'll look at the Light Looks panel. Imagine we are happy with this lighting, but we want to experiment with different lighting options. In the Light Looks panel, let's create a new look by pressing the first button. We'll call it Design 2. We now have an empty lighting design to work on. Let's head over to the Presets panel and switch the top drop-down to Rigs. These look like HDRI maps, but they're actually HDR Light Studio projects containing multiple editable lights. Right-click on one of the thumbnails and select Replace Lights with Rig. The lighting project is loaded into the current light look. We can now edit the lighting just like any other lighting project. I don't like where this light is. I can select it in the light list or right-click on it in the render view. This is the dark background, so it must be this overhead spotlight. We can now move it, scale it, and make it dimmer. To compare the lighting designs, we can quickly switch between light looks by clicking and selecting them. We have tutorial videos explaining the light looks feature in detail. Check out learning resource number 6. What if we wanted to simultaneously change the brightness of all lights that belong on the HDRI map? So in this case, the scrim light and the picture background. This light we can delete as we don't need it. We can select all lights using the Shift key to select a range. Right-click and select Merge to Composite. By merging this into a composite light, it will allow us to have this range of lights be used as an image texture for a light. As you can see, our range of lights is now contained within this composite light. We can use the arrow to see them, and the back arrow to return to the root of the design. If you wanted to move the lights out of this composite, you can by selecting your lights in the light list, then right-clicking and choosing Release from Composite. I'm not going to do that. Instead, I will come out of the composite light. Now let's rotate and change the brightness of this composite light. Composite lights support filters. Let's blur the lighting design with a diffusion blur. With our composite light selected, go to the Appearance tab and from the Filter drop-down, select Diffusion. The lighting is now blurred and you can change the percentage slider to adjust the amount of blur. If we go inside our composite light, we can still edit the lighting and the blurred version will light the shot. We have tutorial videos explaining composite lights in detail, including how to diffuse or blur area lights. Check out learning resource number 7. Okay, so that's the end of the quick start guide. What's next? Well, first, go and have some fun playing with HDR Light Studio and our demo models. Get yourself comfortable with lighting in HDR Light Studio. Then, watch the tutorial workflow on how to use HDR Light Studio connected to your 3D software. Thanks for watching and happy lighting!